have you done for me lately? It's Coons, what have y'all done for us lately? And if there's no answer, the only thing we owe them.
Hey, welcome everyone. Tuesday night, and every Tuesday night, as you guys may or may not know, we are here with Sister Azima, and we will continue our discussion. We've been having a discussion. Our first discussion was last week on fascism in particularly, but all the isms and what they are, what they're designed to create, who created them, some similarities that we see maybe present day people with these isms. And Sister Azima gives us, I always try to say that this about her. She gives us a unique experience being one of our elders, and she doesn't mind me calling her an elder because she's earned that right and she's earned that title. And I'm going to give her that respect as an elder. And giving us that perspective is someone who has lived a lifetime and being able to see the changes in our society, as they say, history, real time. Sometimes it's not our ignorance that gets us in situations. It's just us being uninformed and unaware. Because sometimes the story or the winner of a story doesn't always tell the full story. As they would say, the story is told by the winner. That doesn't mean that the story was actually true. So tonight we're going to have a discussion. Anyone have any comments, statements, or suggestions? More than welcome to put it in the chat. And Sister Azima and myself will go over it. I'll ask her these questions and be able to have this discussion. Good evening, Sister Azima.
Good evening, everybody. I hope everyone's well.
So who was that person that answered the phone when I called you about an hour? Was you answering?
When you called earlier?
Yeah.
Oh, you mean that wonderful voice that I do for you?
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, those are my days when I used to count down for NASA. I know how to do that voice. That very professional animated voice.
What's
Yeah.
the brother friend?
Oh,
So, Sister Azima, we had this discussion last week, and I know that probably the audience that you would probably discuss it with, because when you first look up fascism and you get the dictionary, you look it up and understand who Mussolini was and understand some bit of the ideology of fascism.
mhm.
You don't get, some of the crux of the times, what was going on, why these factions. You had mentioned something last week about these families, how these ruling families in Europe, in particular, they always have this infighting,
Mhm.
and basically how it affects the world view of certain things, and because they've been particularly the dominant society, definitely in the last few hundred years, probably 150 years. Um, we tend to not realize uh, a game that may be going on or understand, or we will engulf ourselves in a family feud. so to say.
Mhm.
So picking back up off of last week's conversation, I'm quite sure you gonna give us some more of this week.
Well, most of the major European families, the royal families, they're related. Cousins, sisters, uncles, nieces, and nephews. There has always been unrequited competition within those families. Rarely a marriage was one of love. It was always one of power, position, and debt. They may be indebted to a particular family member, and that family member wants to marry off because the tutors were doing well, but the stewards were not doing well. And so the stewards marry into the tutor family. It was not uncommon to marry as close as a second or third cousin. Okay, so when you see that, there's a lot of civil sibling rivalry, a lot of sibling rivalry. And then with all of the inbreeding, you tend to have a lot of medical and medical issues as well as physical and mental. But what what they did was that they created a militaristic means of control. Isms are always about control, being able to control the people, the economy, the resources, everything. Okay, right down to how you think. Kind of like that movie we talked about before, V for Vendetta. And we did see it play out in World War II with Hitler determining, oh, we don't even have to go to World War II. Let's back up and look at slavery. If you thought a different way as a slave, they said you were mentally ill and they had the right to kill you. So this has been going on. I'm not going to say in the last 200 years. You can trace this back to Rome, even to the Black Greeks. All of that family binding, okay, not bonding, but binding each other, left it scarred and diminished the families. And so they went into a situation where marrying within the families, competition within the family. So that led to isms. Isms is about I'm going to control you. You're not going to control me. I'm going to use whatever means possible to make your life miserable and make you suffer. Um, a lot of them took on that martyrdom position. And so out of these isms, you get a lot of things: capitalism, you get fascism, Marxism, Taoism. Okay. And the problem is that those that are in control, it's not to benefit the masses, but to benefit them. And their core group or their inner circle, as long as it adheres to that particular mindset. And that's everything. It went right through the Catholic Church, and the church fighting the kings fighting the queens. It's really a chessboard, and if you understand chess, you'll be able to see the moves on the board and the symbolism with it. So after you had all of the Bolshevik wars and all of these wars in Europe that was going on, which basically killed off what we call the royal houses. You only have at best maybe five royal houses that are left. Came World War I. Now we know that Japan was involved in World War I as well as World War II, and so was Germany. Germany was kind of pulled into World War I. They didn't jump in, you know, 10 toes down. They were pulled in. The biggest thing was that Benito Mussolini in 1919 was just World War I devastated them. And so you have to understand we went from a leap from just having wars between families, royal houses, and families to inviting other countries to stand behind you and go to war against your cousin or an uncle or sometimes, direct sibling line. So when you're looking at that, that can be devastating if you're the person on the losing end of the process. And you're like, I thought there was just we're fighting between each other. Now you done brought in, Germany, and you brought in Japan. And so here you brought in Italy. And so what has happened is that when you bring other countries in, they can they can level up the war because they have the resources to go to war. Um, so Mussolini had been hit with that, and he had seen that um, all of his youth, right up until 1919. Mussolini was a journalist. Think about that. He was a journalist. Okay. And he wrote all this political opposition and all this intellectual stuff, but he had come from a family where there was a lot of military servitude to the royal houses. And he looked at the fact that in any situation where you have a royal house, people are going to be beholding to the royal families, whether they're a proxy, okay, kind of like, you know, Queen Elizabeth or her family, they're proxies now. They're monarchs that don't really rule, that don't really control. No, they don't rule. They do have control. They just don't rule. They have a parliament that rules. So what you've done is that when Benito looked back at that, he was like, we've got to get some type of, what is it? I want to say, not, I don't want to use the word control, but he felt that all of the things that were necessary to make a country great, they lost. And so it was up to him to bring some type of stabilization back to what we consider the European world. And in this case, it would be Japan, Italy, and Germany.
Let me ask you, and I don't want to say what I say to be taken out of context
Hmm.
because he had the power of the pen as a journalist. Then he had the ear of the people with his ideas,
Correct.
with his, and like you said, he had a perceived he had an ingrained sentiment because he saw the destruction mayhem that caused his people to fall on hard times and his countrymen to fall on hard times.
Hmm.
Because he had that power to pen, he like I said, he had the ear to be able to control. Some people would say control, manipulate, but basically, he had an influence. He was an influencer.
Hmm. Hmm. And the fact that China, like Japan, like Russia, America was really good at diplomacy. You know, I'm going to talk to you like this. You know what I'm saying? That's how America works. They can look at you and they're talking out the side of their mouth. And so Europe had an opportunity to see that because democracy was beginning to reign in Europe, which took away from the monarchy. Everybody wanted a monarchy. Why? Because when you look at the tiers of it, the people directly under the first line or first tier of the king or queen or the royal house, those were your lords. They became the landlords. And then everybody else, they were just the poor, the peasants, you know, the pagans. And so when you see that democracy, we'll get to that, has its own levels of personal lines of discrimination. It may be 12 or 14 levels deep as opposed to 2 to 3 levels deep. Okay. Those landlords were upset. And this is where Benito came in. He was able to influence them. Look at what you're giving up. You're giving this up, and the masses of people are going to tell you what to do. Well, you used to be right under the royal house. You were so and so's chancellor, and you were such and such a thing. And so, by them hearing that, they adhered to fascism. Remember, I said isms is being able to control every aspect of what a citizen does, everything from where they live, how they think, um, the clothing that they wear, every every aspect of what makes a culture and society, the 7 tiers that we had talked about. They were in control, but they were in control of it in a very austere or authoritative and militaristic approach. So you really couldn't do anything. And if you sneeze wrong, you might risk having your head cut off. Okay. So Benito used that. Mussolini used it. And once he started using that, the first people you're going to always appeal to in any type of social change are your college students.
Hmm.
People coming out of high school, college. Why?
Sure.
Because they can look at the past and they're looking at the future where they need to go. And so therefore they are fertile ground for the seeds you want to plant. And so as you plant these seeds, you're able to pull them in by saying, see, this is what's going to happen to you in the future if you don't get control of this now, and blah, 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 blah. And we can show that because we just came out of World War I, or we're going to be heading into a war. When you're talking to these college-bound people, they realize that this is not where they want to be. So they're going to stand with, not all of them. All you need is that small group, like that fraternity or sorority. They're going to stand with him. And when they stand with him, they're also willing to go out and campaign on his behalf.
So the fertile ground of a college campus, or we'll just say a higher education,
A higher
like you said,
educational institution or the academies.
because
Okay.
they got that fertile mind, and they're gonna always look on life as trying to do better than what it presently is. Let me ask you, for these isms, can they only really flourish and exist during tough times?
You
Like, does it
create
have?
tough, you have to
Okay.
create tough times in order for them to survive. So America's been around 510 years. 495 of those was at war. Think about that. So the same thing, you have to look at Europe. You had the great, you killed off everybody that was a descendant of Peter. You had the Bolshevik Wars, the Russian Wars. You had those wars of 1810 and 1812. You had the French Wars. You had all types of wars in Europe, but they were always instituted because there was family rivalry. Okay. And that family rivalry was because you had the king or the king's court was always in the ear of the king or queen, gossiping when so and so doesn't like you and they're looking to do X, Y, and Z, while they go back and converse with the priesthood or the chancellor in the opposing camp, and they were doing the same thing because the priesthood, the church felt it was their place to rule all of the European countries because their people were scholarly. Why? Because they stole the information from Karnak and they stole the information from Timbuktu and they stole all of this information, right? And they were only going to give it to the church. And the only other people who were literate would be the royal houses. And you had to distinguish. If you had a son who had effeminate ways, you didn't educate him. If you had a daughter that had more masculine or she was prone to strategic planning for military, you didn't educate her. You picked and choose who you needed to be educated because you wanted them to mimic the father. Okay. If for some reason that didn't occur, unlike in Africa or in America, where the matriarchal system was the key thing, and um, lineage of power was passed from mother to son, okay, and then son to daughter, because it's matrilineal. In a patrilineal, it's always domination, control, authority. So your isms come about, and it doesn't matter if it's Taoism, Hinduism, um, fascism or Marxism, because it's all about being in control. So with Mussolini taking that position, that he was tired of seeing all of these terrible things happen because he's seen it go from a monarchy down to a democracy where people had a voice. And he was like, this is not working. And so, therefore, fascism came into play because the countries were starving. They were fighting all the time. They were always at war. You were damaging the land around you. You're already living in an environment where you had very short summers and long extended winter periods. And so it was hard to grow crops. And so even if you were a sheep herder or a cattleman or whatever, it was very hard to make it through those times, unlike other areas that may be in a temperate zone or other countries or regions that aren't faced with that. Plus, you were always in a place where there was a lot of hard rock under you, not as much fertile soil. And you were constantly faced with famine. And so here was a way to help the people. If we're going to become a modern society, that's how he's thinking, it needs to be controlled. And we need to control that modern society. And so Benito decided to implement fascism. Fascism, go back and study Rome. It comes from the fascias of Rome. Who were the fascias of Rome? They were the senators and the members of the House. And they made the determination. These are the same senators and members of the House who thought it was okay to make young boys eunuchs in order to have sex with them to keep from getting women pregnant and make them look like their wives, these young boys. They dressed them up, they would do all the things necessary to make them look like their wives or their girlfriends or whatever, and they were raping them. Okay, so these were your fasces, okay, FACES. And then Benito looked at that, how the fasces controlled what was going on in Rome. Okay, the Romans fought against the Greeks. The Greeks were your color. And as they began to change over from all of this fighting, Benito said that we have to be in control because he didn't want to repeat what he saw in Rome. So he was going to modify the fasces position by making it very authoritative, very militaristic, very dominating of the people. And that is where they were able to have turncoats. You can snitch on your neighbor. And they began to implement that process. And you will see it in all of the isms: communism, colonialism, tell on your neighbor. And we will reward you. We'll reduce your sentence, or we'll let you out of jail, or we will give you some type of monetary gratitude. But it teaches you to tell on your neighbor. Okay, even if your neighbor's not doing anything, it's okay to fabricate it because they're going to believe you because you're helping the system. Okay, and so Benito, he ran with it. he ran with that. And then when he began to interact with Hitler, Stalin was no different. They decided this was the overarching piece of the National Alliance of the People, and that later became known as the Nazi Party, in order to maintain control, because that's what they were about. They wanted control. And so um, Hitler had some good ideas in the beginning, but he was overshadowed. I'm not saying he's a nice guy. I'm just saying you have to give him his due where it's due. He had thoughts about making sure that Germany doesn't fall back where it had before. After World War One, Germany was just, it was beyond shattered. And nobody trusted them, nobody liked them. And that's not just after World War One, that's after the entire wars that they were going through with the royal houses and the royal families, the Tudor War, the Stuarts War. And so, with all of that, the fascism allowed them to place seeds, seeds of aggression and hostility in what the most fertile minds, those that have the right to go to college or any education, especially on the higher realms where they talk philosophy and historical continuity and what's important with monarchies. And so here you go with your fascism. So to the family, thank you. And so with that, it always played on the intellect of the person. And when you're playing on the intellect, you are able to grab hold of those fertile minds, and they are going to march greater on your behalf than anybody else. Because older people have already lived through the past. They're not interested in continuing with war or military positions. Okay.
They want change, but they more want change to their personal life. They don't want to change far as like bucking the system where when you're bucking that, like when you go from one ism to another, you're
Hmm.
bucking you're the way you're bucking the system in that aspect where it's got to be drastic change. It's going to be like you said, it's going to be wars, it's going to be unrest.
Hmm.
Even for that, even, let me ask you, when you look at Hitler and you I know this guy probably has had more stuff written about him where most people don't understand his ideology. They just think it was just, death and mayhem. With having the the fascism ideas from Mussolini and then having his ethnic agenda, uh, where if you wasn't that Anglo-Saxon, how did those two clash? Did those two his ideology and his ethnic agenda, did they clash?
Very much so. And I don't think people realize Hitler ended up being a drug addict. He was heroin bound. At the height of his reign, he wasn't in control. He was bound to heroin. And so, and the opioids, the opium, the poppy seed, so that's where his mind was. And you can't deny the fact that he gave the world some good things, trucks, a very reliable vehicle. We call it the Volkswagen. It means the people's car. Okay. He came up with some other systems um, that worked, which I want to call it like the air raid systems. And you all are not familiar with it, but when I was growing up, you didn't have the cell phone, tell me when the storm is coming. Every neighborhood had an air raid warden. And that was the person who knew where all the underground shelters and stuff were to protect you in case of, bombs that are bombing you and falling out of the sky, war or whatever. And they knew how to get you there. They knew how to account for all of their citizens that were under their control. And it's usually like a 5 to 7 block radius that they had to take care of. This was a concept he had come up with. So there were things that he had offered to the public, but like with all leaders, good or bad, famous or infamous, you're going to always have someone underneath you that can undermine you, and it changes the course of what you do. You will either die out or you become a drug addict. And with Hitler, he became the drug addict. Okay, so I'm not saying he was the world's best guy. I'm just saying that when you have Stalin, who's coming to you with communism, and you got Mussolini talking to you about fascism, and you just trying to get your people, because that was his entire objective. He wanted to make sure that Germany was no longer looked upon as the enemy, because Germany, because of their relationship to the Tudors and the Stuarts, they had already been in, wars for over 400 years, and then World War One came, and they were like SOL, you know, and they lost everything that they had. So when
Let
you
me
have
let
isms,
me
you have to be sure that you have to be able to control. I'm sorry, let me just get this point out. You have to control everybody in your country. That includes your farmers and the people who live far away from the cities. It's easy to control the cities because you got them locked down. Outside the military, you have the police there, but you don't have a military out where the farmer is. And so you must go out there and destroy the land, burn it down, or whatever it takes to strike fear in their hearts and either migrate to the city or buckle down and starve.
interesting.
Go ahead. You had a question.
You spoke about how this type of ideology any ideology is always propagandized to or a younger individual to higher education.
Hmm.
Let me ask you, with someone who went on higher education, advocate for higher education,
What do
do
you
you
have?
feel do you feel like I'm asking, do you feel like for some, because I know for me, I went to school with friends and they
Hmm.
would go off to college and they would come back a little different.
Okay.
And you'd be like, okay, is they all right? Like, how do you feel about higher education with some people? Is do you feel like it's an education or an indoctrination?
Under the current system of the world, it's more of an indoctrination. When melanated skinned people were running this world, it was um, a, a place of what they call cosmic enlightening. It would enlighten you to the higher spiritual levels of life, and understanding your role in that process and how you can help others. When we had the Anunnaki come in and modify humans, then it changed from that to complete authority.
Mm,
And so when you went from a place of cosmic enlightenment, where we talked about frequency and all that stuff in the very beginning, these leaders were not devoid of that information. They knew because they went to Africa and stole that information. They didn't just steal gold and trinkets and all that. They went in and looked at their cosmic books, their zodiac things, the way the the way our solar system, our galaxy moved through the cosmic divine. And as it moved through, how these frequencies changed and created certain types of conditions um, on the planet. Those conditions were looked at highly by the church and what they call their spiritualist people, which were really folks that understood the cosmic calendar, because we had several cosmic calendars on our planet. And that led to a concentration of the isms, because what happened was that as the Anunnaki left and they mated with humans that were here, those children couldn't leave here and go live in their world because their bodies couldn't handle that change. They'd probably have to go there and live in a suit for the rest of their life. and they wouldn't be able to eat that food. And so they were left behind. That can lead to abandonment issues, all kinds of issues. Even though they may be brothers, cousins, nieces, aunts, and uncles, you already came here, those Anunnaki already came here with family tie issues. And then you're going to mate with the people here and create these children who can't leave. Those children are angry, they're bitter, and they become the royal houses. And over time, in those royal houses, they implement these isms. And get back to your question, I think about Mao. Mao Zedong was mad at everybody that had gone to school, high school, really junior college and above. He killed them. I mean, he would set them on fire, hack them up. He would literally murder millions of his own people because they were um, advanced intellectually. And he thought that that was a crime. And he also implemented that one child rule, which devastated China. Because as your parents get older, you're one child. You can't take care of both of them. Something has to give. And
Yeah.
so the people had to leave the rural areas to go into the cities to help bond together to take care of family members that were aging out, which left these children in a state of depression. A lot of them wouldn't marry. They didn't marry. They couldn't marry. They were scared that once they got married, they'd have these children. So what happened was that they would marry and they would have a relationship on the side in the rural parts of China and have another child out there following the one child rule. And you know it's funny, but what happens that once they found out, they didn't imprison the parent, they killed the child. And
Yeah.
so the world took pause. Okay, they looked at Mussolini's, Stalin and Hitler, and then they looked at Mao. But before they even looked at Mao, they were looking at Leopold because he was he was another example of that. Because they were following the teachings of the fascists. That's how you get fascism, based on what was going on in Rome.
So even though, as we would say, Rome fell, the ideology, uh, the remnants of what they believe, far as those senators and how they live their life, continues to remain to today.
Yeah, the structure of Rome fell, but the ideologies were carried on by the church, and the church sanctioned that. Now think about this. The church went to places like Guam, the Philippines, all of these areas where they have the Latin American. Okay. The Latin Americans is in the ancient time, in the old world, the first world, they were your working class people. You told those working class people that they would have to marry abusive partners, and you're not allowed to divorce that partner. Even though they may have stabbed you, beaten you up, poisoned you, you're not allowed to divorce them. So men would be married to abusive women, and women could be married to abusive men. This fell under the guise of the fasces of Rome. Why? Because the Roman men who had rank, power, and position were making young boys eunuchs so that they can have their intimate fantasies without impregnating a woman, because they would have to give up 50% of what they own if they impregnated a woman. But they wouldn't have to give up anything if they had intimate pleasures with a boy.
Mm.
And so there were a lot of poor children on the street. You have to understand this system creates abject poverty. And so when you have children on the street begging, and their parents either cast them out because they can't take care of them, or they're dead and nobody's going to come to their aid, then those rich senators, congressmen would take them in and make them their tool of pleasure. And the church ran on that and used it from a for political reasons at the highest level, and then they turned a blind eye to the isms because it allowed the church to have the voice of the world. That's why you see a lot of fighting now within that church dynamic, because they reinforce a lie. And that's what isms do. They reinforce my personal decision to be in control of you.
Mm.
However demented that may be, they reinforce that.
Let me ask you, and if you don't you as
Huh?
I like to say, you don't gave it to us right there.
Okay.
Let me ask you. This is basically a two-part question, and if anybody has any questions for Stazim in relevance to what we're talking about, feel free to ask your question, and she'll answer it to the best of her ability. What There's two major factors when you're dealing with these isms, in particular. Definitely, yeah, all of them, militarily and propaganda.
Hmm.
Why was it so important that Hitler had to continue to build his military over? Like he wanted the biggest military. Like he just needed a military. Explain that mindset and what was the purpose?
Anytime you have to draft people into the military for war, for combat, they are not willing participants. Some of them, they'll get in and they are going to get to their destination and they're going to flee. That's not uncommon in the Roman army. You had a lot of that. Not everybody's built for war. And so when even with American soldiers, you're not built for war. Even the Africans, when they were fighting the Anunnaki, or the indigenous black, what they call Indians here, when they were in war and fighting, they would have a period in which they would have war. And then there's a period in which they do the healing process. And you would see all of that with the cupping and the what we call burning of the sage. I'm not going to go into all that, but um, it created a certain type of chemical atmosphere in which it will allow them to release the psychosis of battle.
Reset, yeah.
Yep. So
Because all that murder, destruction, and mayhem, it plays a major role on your psyche.
yeah, which plays a major role on your physical health. And so you will have people who are going to desert. So you have to constantly recruit while you're in war. And you have to understand, Hitler didn't always have money to feed his people, his soldiers. A lot of them would go in and read it. It's even in your Bible. It'll tell you, it's in the Torah, it's in the Quran, okay? It's in the book of Begida. The spoils of the war belong to you. So if you get in there and conquer a town or a city, you can take the women and the children and kill the men off and own the house and everything else around it. Because they didn't have a way to feed you. America sends food. I don't think you all understand that. We send food overseas for our soldiers. And I don't mean the MREs either. We send food that we cook. We sent a whole cafeteria big enough to serve 500 or 600 soldiers at a time. Because if you're bombing the land over there, you don't have a way to get food. So we have to send the food.
So if you don't have no food, you're gonna do what most people do. You're gonna get it by any way necessary.
Right. And that leads to them becoming criminalistic. And in isms, it's okay. Totalitarianism, authoritativism, okay. Um, Being able to suppress the opposition, extreme nationalism. Oh, I'm patriotic to my core. This is what they build you up on. That's why the Marines always do the hoorah, and they build up to that. And we laugh, but I'm gonna show you how you have to look at it right now. Go to a regular high school or college football game. Those bands that come out there is the same process you do when you have war. You send your drums out and your horns to announce that the king is coming to fight. We do it now. And we say, oh, that's a great football game for the college. Oh, that's a great high school football game. But you're really emulating what it takes to create war.
It is literally for anybody that ever knows about the HBCU experience where they have to battle the bands, even have it in high school with high school rivalries. You live in certain areas and high school bands are big and huge. I actually have a good friend of mine. He actually went to got a college scholarship because he played in the band in high school, and he went on a. He actually is a big music guy, and he teaches music, and it all came because he used to play the drums.
Hmm.
So that's very interesting. How something that you know a tradition that most people think is football and just the band leading the football team out. It really is a tradition of war. So let me ask you, and I don't want to take too much from the topic at hand, but I
Hmm.
want to use this question as a way to maybe get people to look at something that just happened on Saturday and be able to correlate with some of the propaganda in reference to fascism. And I'm talking about the No Kings March and how an estimated 7 million people came out in various cities and spoke about no kings. And a lot of people feel like it was mainly towards President Trump. You had a lot of different fractions that was there.
Hmm.
Some paid provocateurs, as we would say.
Hmm.
But what's your thoughts with that? With people and certain groups correlating present day politics with fascism or any of those isms from back then. And I know we'll discuss it even more in future shows. But what's your thoughts on that?
It hasn't changed during McCarthy's era. At the end of World War II, we had McCarthyism, and it was all based on fascism. Okay. The MOVE, MOVE, remember that organization, MOVE, where we ended up dropping a bomb on them out of Philadelphia. That's your state, and you're in New Jersey. But they dropped that bomb on the people in Philadelphia in 1985 because they felt that they were communists and fascists. And they could negotiate them out of the building, so they burned 62 houses on that block. They killed 11 people. Five of them were children. And so nobody had to be accountable for that. That's what happens when you have isms. Nobody has to be accountable for anything because it's nationalism, it's authoritative. We were taking care of the opposition. We needed to suppress them. Okay. Um, this is what happens when you have your isms, because your isms must have total obedience. It's not required, it's your whole life, total
Mm.
obedience. Okay.
They so they can't exist whatsoever unless they have full totalitism.
Yes,
Full.
they are totalitarian no matter what. Okay. They are a nightmare. And see, it was okay as long as you had slavery, because you had a group of people, and then over time you can put other groups of people in there on the periphery and treat them as you wish when you were treating this entire larger body of people. And slavery is what we call a large manifestation of your isms, because it was total, it was complete, it was okay by society, it oppressed only certain groups of people. They made sure that if you escaped, you could be hunted down. Um, they sold your children, or they fed your children to animals, or they raped your women in front of you. They had no regard for you whatsoever. Isms have no regard for any form of human life, and that includes any form of life. That includes human or animal. You were there to serve them to the death,
Mm.
however that death may be.
Yeah, I found it interesting. I know that the No Kings marches were planned, but I thought it was very interesting knowing how this government works and knowing the structure of this republic, having a No Kings march during the middle of a government shutdown. It's kind of like it's ironic.
Well, I
Um,
mean, they had a No King's March when he first came into office. I haven't seen this much hatred towards a president. Ronald Reagan had a lot of hatred. The minute he spoke up and said we had to get rid of the Federal Reserve, I mean, they came after him in all kinds of ways, and he was shot, if you remember that. Okay. So, anytime any president rears their head against the established norms, you have a problem. And I think what's happening now is that we are in the cosmic cycle of ending the isms. Okay. It's known as the Great Reset. It's ending the isms. And when you end the isms, it isn't just a country or a president or a political party, it's the viewpoint of the masses of people. You got 8 billion people on this planet. 6 billion of us are tired of this BS. And we are shutting our mind down to that. And as you shut your mind down, you look at all the other ways that things can impact your life and make your life whole and complete, as opposed to this over here. I mean, we talked about the fact that credit is nothing more than debt. How can you control people? You control them through credit.
yeah, I
Credit,
know in
okay.
my short lifetime. So I
Hmm.
have a question for Rodney that
Hmm.
I'm gonna ask. I know
So
in
I'm
my
sorry.
short lifetime, I always say to myself, to hear people openly promote socialism based off of what I was taught in grammar school, to
Hmm.
hear people openly speak about socialism nowadays, it's from my limited understanding from what I was taught. That's amazing that they do that. It's like so far fetched, but like you said, when you when when you have the death of these things about to appear, everybody with their isms, this, that, and third, and ideology is going to speak on trying to hold on or promote an ism. But like you said, at the end of the day, majority of this world is just tired of all that crap. So Rodney asked the question. He said, "Is it true that Hitler met with Jesse Owens?"
I'm sorry. Did he do what with Jesse Owens? He met with him. Yes, he did. And he did shake his hand because he did win the gold medal.
it has always been propaganda, Rodney, by our government that this meeting did not happen. And there were accounts that Jesse Owens confirmed it. People that did his biography confirmed it. They try to say that it didn't happen because of what was going on at the time and how this country continues to treat melanated folks, and why would Hitler meet with him? But I know someone who knew Jesse Owens. One of the guys that was in the Jesse Owens camp, ran track against him, was like a high school hero of one of the high schools that I went to. They remained friends until both of them passed away, and their stories have been tied together forever. And actually, this confirmed story about him and Hitler meeting, this government tries to say that it didn't happen. Sister Azima, he said check. He said thank you, basically.
You know that how can I put this? The whole Kings thing, unfortunately, it is out of sync with what's going on. They're trying to say that Trump sees himself as a king and that he's never going to leave office. Okay. That right there is a fallacy because you vote your people in. Our three branches of government allow us to vote people in. And we must also understand we are, what does the Constitution say? In this republic. It doesn't say in this democracy. In this republic for which we stand. Okay. We are a republic, not a democracy.
Let me ask you, Sister Azima, and you know, you've seen a lot of protests. You've seen a lot of protests, and this is our constitutional right, and we don't always tell people who try to uphold the Constitution. When you sit back and you see protests like this, and understanding that civics was taught in school, when you were in school, civics was taught. Civics is not taught in until you get to higher education. Nowhere in America do you learn civics. I don't care what nobody tell you. It is not taught in primary education. You have to go to higher education to learn true civics. Basically, I think in the early '80s. When you look at these type of protests, do you how do you feel about it? Because I know protest has an ends, a means, a reason. How do you feel about these type of protests, and what's the objective?
The objective is to keep the money flowing to the New World Order, to those 100 families that feel it's their right, which would be the descendants of the Anunnaki that had come. They feel it's their right to run this entire planet. They were not prepared for the fact that the living humans that were here, because I remember I told you in the very beginning, we didn't have to speak, we thought it. Our thoughts would go between each other. We didn't have to have the language. The language is a barrier. Writing is a barrier. Technology is a barrier because it removes you from the true God force within you that allows you to speak to yourself and your neighbors around you, and they would truly understand what you're saying. When we start talking, we have to go like, well, wait a minute, what word can I find in your language that means what I mean here? And so that technology became a barrier. So the whole King's March was to say, we have a man that's a king. That's not the case.
I mean, even some, as we would say, some of our intellect people that are on this planet, that no structure of government, why would you, like you said, to get that money flow going? But some people clearly know that it's checks and balances within our system, that it's no possible way that he could ever become a king whatsoever. I mean, you even got some theorists talking about, oh, he's gonna institute martial law during the election. That's what is floating around now. He's gonna institute martial law,
But
so
we're under martial law. We've been under
it's,
martial law since 9/11.
it's gonna suspend the Constitution.
But
you know,
we've been under martial law since September 11th of 2001. We've been under martial law. Understand that we've been under martial law. That's where they stepped up all of these walking around and taking people out of their cars, and especially in what they consider marginal neighborhoods. But we have been under martial law since September 11th of 2001. And every news reporter who stood out there and said, hey, I heard explosions in the building right after the plane went in the building. I want you to understand something. Those buildings are made to withstand an airplane strike. They have to. Some pilots have a heart attack, just like you have people behind the wheel of a car. That building will stop that plane. And there are securities and systems in the building that if a plane hits certain areas of the building, everything shuts off. Water, and I know you're saying you need water to take the fire down. You never put water on metal planes because of the magnesium on that plane will spark a bigger fire. So the buildings were built to withstand that, and there were safety measures put in place to make sure it didn't get out of hand without the fire departments getting there to help out because they know what they're dealing with. So we have been under that. That martial law protected us from having Hillary Clinton as our president. So the only thing that they're angry with, and it's both the political parties, the rhinos in the Republican Party and the Democrats as a whole, is that he came in and he said, oh my God, look at you all. You're in the bed. Let me take the covers off. We can now see you. That's what they're upset about, is that he has removed the covers and we can see them clearly. And we're going, oh no, that's not what I voted you in to do. That's not what I'm interested in for you. And what face do they use? They use this face because whenever you want someone to be president, we are the ones that have the deciding vote. I don't care what they tell you. We have the deciding vote. And we decided for Donald Trump. And that has never gotten away from them. Joy Reid, Don Lemon, all of them, they're talking about that. They're angry about that. They're upset about that. They failed their leaders in making sure we would follow an ism, racism. And what we're trying to teach you is that you don't have to be a victim. Teach your children the truth. These time periods did exist and it happened. It's not happening now. And it's too many of us to say, no, we're not going back to that, no matter what. Okay. However, we don't always have to remain the victim emotionally and psychologically. And so what you're seeing is propaganda trying to get you to go back to a place where you relinquish all of your control. If Trump really wanted to be a dictator, he would have done that. He's a businessman. He would have negotiated the people where he need to have them and say, boom, we're gonna make this a dictatorship. And that did not happen because he's not interested in that. But the old rhinos and the Democrats, they're trying to go through and pick through this the way they want to. But it's an ism. And the ism they're using is racism. So what happens under racism? It segregates you from your thoughts. It pits one black person against another and then pits all of us against white people. And when they keep that narrative going, who's in control? The guy that's in the streets. And then you'll be like, I'm ready for a war. And then you go out and fight a war, but you won't be fighting the war over here. They probably send you over to Afghanistan or Iran, or maybe to the Philippines or Grenada. And you're like, that's not what I signed up for. I signed up to be down there on, New York on Fifth Avenue protesting. No, you're over here now. Okay. So you have to remember, isms is the ability to have a totalitarian government using absolute authority through supportive opposition. I mean, they come in and they just bear down. You are the opposition. And then they're going to control you, everything about you. That's why they have Google and all these metadata and all that stuff. It's because they're collecting data on you.
Start. That's a whole nother. That's a whole nother talk. There. Wait. I already think some of that stuff was intelligence gathering anyway. But with that, any final thoughts, Sister Azim?
No, because this would lead to a whole nother topic. I would rather just wait till another day and have that topic.
Great. Well, that concludes part 2. Like Sister Azim and myself had already said, she's willing. This was actually the crux of me asking her. I asked her about fascism, and it was the crux to the discussion when we even started with constitutional law and common law. So we're going to be here it'll be a few parts of this. We're in no rush to get through it. We really want to be able to, as she tells us, to understand what's going on and don't allow these type of ideologies to overwhelm with the propaganda or to leave you with the ability to not think for yourself.
Right.
With that, you guys have a great week, and we'll see you guys next week.
Thank
Take
you.
care.